State, who's the next witness?
State calls Andrew Spragg, Your Honor.
Andrew Spragg, please. Andrew, good afternoon. Follow that deputy, and he's going to pass you off to Deputy Dunkley. And once you get out there to the middle, if you do me a favor, you're going to raise your right hand and face Madam Clerk.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you're about to give in this cause should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Terrific. You're going to have a seat right up here. And for the first time today, I think maybe the second, you're very tall. Make sure that this microphone is close to your mouth and you're talking directly into it. And the whole base of it moves and the whole bottom goes up and down. And so once you're satisfied there, if you would do me a favor, state your full name for the record and then slowly spell it for the jurors.
Andrew Spragg, S-P-R-A-G-G.
Terrific. State, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Counselor.
You retired at this time, sir?
Yes, sir, I am.
And if you would, please go through your military background and your law enforcement background.
Starting in the 80s, I received my Bachelor of Arts degree in criminal justice from Michigan State University, after which I joined the Marine Corps Infantry, after which I took a job as a deputy sheriff in Ingham County, Michigan, which is the capital. I got laid off in 1989 and found a job in Palm Beach Gardens. During my tenure at Palm Beach Gardens, I was a detective. I was part of a federal task force known at the time as Weed and Seed. I was a defensive tactics instructor, firearms instructor, cultural human diversity instructor, as well as a mobile field force and riot control instructor. I was in charge of our training division, taught at the police academy, I was in charge of our traffic homicide division. I got promoted after 9/11. 2001, I became an instructor through Homeland Security and Weapons of Mass Destruction and Counterterrorism, in addition to Mobile Field Force Command. I was a member of our Special Operations, Professional Standards and Training, during which time I worked on accreditation, and we became both state and nationally accredited agency. I finished my career as a sergeant on road patrol.
And, sir, what were your duties as a sergeant on road patrol when you finished your career?
Supervising the officers that were on duty at the time and additional contract officers.
And back in October 2015, were you employed by the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department as a sergeant of road patrol?
Yes, sir.
Were you familiar with one Manraja as being a police officer with your agency at that time?
I am.
Can you please identify him and describe something he's wearing today, sir?
He's seated with Defense Counsel, a light blue tie on.
As the record reflects, the witness has identified the defendant, Manraja, Your Honor.
Noted.
Thank you. Did you ever supervise the defendant while at the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department?
I did.
And on October 18th of 2015, did you respond to an officer-involved shooting at the location of Palm PGA and 95?
I did.
What were you doing at that time right before you responded?
We were having some disturbances at the Marriott. Sergeant Anderson and other officers were upstairs with a domestic dispute. And it was pretty much at the time the nightclub was letting out. We had a brawl on a party bus, and I was supervising the officers that were attempting to control that crowd.
And at the time, sir, were you dressed in a uniform?
I was,
You have a big badge on your chest?
of course.
How did you hear about the officer-involved shooting?
Emergency alert tone through dispatch. The dispatcher advised that our unit Alpha 1, which was Mr. Raja at this point, had been involved in an officer-involved shooting at the location known as PGA and I-95.
And you said that Officer Raja's call sign that evening was Alpha 1?
Yes.
How was the call sign designated to each officer, sir?
It was designated by the area of the city that they worked.
So some officers' call sign would change each shift depending on which area they worked?
Yes, some officers worked the same area always, and other officers would work different areas on different nights.
And did you respond to the scene, sir?
I did.
And when you responded to the scene, did you see the defendant, Manraja?
I did.
Did you see anyone else present at that time?
No, I was the first on scene.
And where was the defendant?
He was standing in front of the Ford Econoline van, I think. I think it was a Ford Econoline, but the white van, and near the hood of what was later determined to be Mr. Jones' SUV.
And based on what you just said, was the white van pulled head first?
Yes.
Up to the front of the SUV?
Yes.
Were they head-to-head, or were they perpendicular, or one was pulled to like a corner or diagonal?
Mr. Jones' SUV was on the off-ramp in the breakdown lane, and the van obviously had pulled up by going the wrong way up the ramp, and was not head-to-head, at an angle.
But the front of the van was facing the front of the SUV?
It was, sir.
Do you recall how close that van was to the SUV?
Not exactly, Counselor. You could walk between it.
Could you do much more than that?
I don't recall, Counselor.
Did the defendant have his gun drawn at that time?
He did. He
How was he dressed?
was dressed in tactical pants, and he had a tan long-sleeve shirt on.
Did he have a hat or no hat?
I don't recall.
How was his demeanor?
He was obviously running on adrenaline after the incident that he'd just been involved in. So he was pretty worked up and trying to give me information as fast as he could, because we believed we had a suspect at large.
Did he have a tactical vest on, sir?
No, he did not.
Did he have a radio on?
He'd come on the radio. He said, because the original call was over a 911 cell phone call. And then he came on the radio right before I got there and said, "I'm on the radio." So he had his radio in his hand at that point.
Did he have any identification on him that showed that he was a law enforcement officer?
No.
In a critical incident like an officer-involved shooting, when you get on scene, what's the first thing you do to that officer?
Immediately go directly to the person. Any sergeant or supervisor that's worth their sand is going to go to the officer, him or her, whether it's any critical incident, not just an officer-involved shooting, first to make sure they're okay. Second, to get firsthand information as opposed to going through dispatch, which would make it third-hand information, to find out immediately what needs to be done. That's common police work throughout every agency.
Did you do that here, sir?
I did.
And did you speak to the defendant?
I did.
Did he say anything to you?
Yes, he told me that Mr. Jones, later determined Mr. Jones, that he had a gun and that he had ordered him to drop it, and he believed he had shot him. He then told me that the subject ran north in the grass between the off-ramp and the Doubletree Hotel, and he said he saw him throw what he believed was the silver gun, because he said he had a silver gun in the grass behind Mr. Jones' vehicle.
Did he say whether or not he believed he shot Mr. Jones?
Yes, he said he believed he hit him, yes.
Did he say whether or not Mr. Jones had fired at him?
No, he did not.
And where he said that he saw Mr. Jones throw the silver gun, where was that?
It was to the rear of Mr. Jones' SUV.
In the grass or on the roadway?
He pointed to some tall grass.
And when he pointed to that area, do you know around how far it was that he was pointing, or that you thought he was pointing?
At the time, I thought it was about 20 feet behind Mr. Jones' SUV.
Now, when you arrive and you speak with the defendant, what is your primary focus, your priority?
Well, immediately, if we have an active shooter situation, I immediately need to secure the area. Once beyond making contact with the officer, then we need to secure the area, pull in whatever assets are necessary to contain the area and contain that person. And then we would need, once that is done, then we would need procedurally to attempt to locate that subject. So to do that, there would be calls for canine. There would be calls for air support from the Sheriff's Department with a helicopter. I contacted Jupiter Police Department. I asked them to send units from the north to the south to help block the exit ramp from PGA and I-95 onto PGA. So I pulled in as many assets as I could to secure the area. We had EMS come immediately and stage across the street in a safe location so that if we did locate or if anything escalated, we would be able to render medical aid immediately. And then once all those things were in place, then we began to search.
And so, and you're saying, but are you setting up a perimeter?
Yes, sir, that's the word that is commonly used.
And is personnel or assets arriving on scene to you while all this is happening, sir?
Yes, sir.
And who were the ones arriving on scene, sir?
The officers from my department,
Yes, sir. Who would be after you? Who would be arriving on scene from your department that you can recollect?
there was probably 14, 15 of us on duty. I think it was, everybody was there at some point. The order in which they arrived, I couldn't testify to. I don't recall. I know, I do believe the first person to arrive after me was Officer Fee.
And was Officer Fee on scene with you, or did he arrive adjacent to the parking lot of the Doubletree?
He arrived adjacent in the Doubletree parking lot.
And then did Sergeant Mole arrive at some later time?
He did.
How about Sergeant Anderson, now Captain Anderson?
He did.
And Officer Arlotta?
Yes.
And were any of those individuals there when you first arrived?
No.
Were any of those individuals there when you first spoke with the defendant?
No.
Once you had your assets in place, did you begin a search
We did.
for the subject now you know as Corey Jones?
We did.
And how did you conduct that, sir?
We started, Sergeant Anderson retrieved a ballistic shield, and Officer Arlotta and I started driving slowly up the wrong way on the ramp with Officer Raja. And at some point, I decided to send Officer Arlotta back to our facility to get a military-grade armored vehicle known as the TK-4 for protection as we were searching. Shortly after he left, as we were moving up the ramp, we spotted what was later to be Turman, Mr. Jones, down in the gully, laying in the grass.
And so at the time that you sent an officer to go get a military-grade vehicle for protection, what was your understanding of the situation?
That there was potentially an active shooter,
And who gave you that information?
Officer Raja.
And that's also after he said he already saw the subject throw the gun?
Yes.
Once you located what you believe potentially to be a body, how did you approach Mr. Jones?
With using the ballistic shield, Sergeant Anderson, we lined up in formation behind him. It's called a tactical stick. And we went over the side of the gully down to where Mr. Jones was. Mr. Jones was laying face down.
When you say we, who was on that tactical stick with you, sir?
Sergeant Mull, myself, Sergeant Anderson, and Officer Raja.
You've already testified that Sergeant Anderson, now Captain Anderson, was on the shield, the ballistic shield, is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Was he armed with a firearm in addition to holding that ballistic shield, if you can remember?
I don't remember if his sidearm was holstered. I had my AR-15, and I believe Officer Mull, I don't recall what everybody was armed with.
Everybody was armed, though?
Of course.
And you said you'd already seen a body from the roadway that you began to approach, sir?
with the use of flashlights.
When you located Corey Jones laying face down, was he moving?
No, he was not.
What did you do at that time?
Well, we formed a tactical stick and we approached Mr. Jones. He was laying face down with his head towards the ramp and his feet towards the Doubletree, and his arms were underneath him. We rolled him over to ensure there wasn't a second weapon and make sure he was unarmed, and then immediately called for EMS to come to render aid.
Prior to rolling him over, did you shout any commands at him at all? or
Of course.
What kind of commands?
Show us your hands, police, show us your hands.
Is that what you would do in an occasion where you cannot see what's in the individual's hands,
Yes, it's common procedure.
regardless of whether or not that individual is moving at all?
Yes.
And after you rolled over, well, I say you, do you know who rolled over Mr. Jones?
I believe it was Officer Raja.
Former Officer Raja.
Yes,
Was Mr. Jones's pulse checked?
yes.
Was there a pulse that was found at that time that you're aware of?
I just don't recall anybody saying anything.
Was Mr. Jones moving at all or talking in any manner?
No, he wasn't.
Was there blood visible on him?
Yes, there was.
Did you call the medics?
Immediately.
What did you do at that time, sir?
We secured that area until the medics could get to him in a safe manner, and they pronounced him.
And then what did you do after that?
We had no reason to believe there were any other suspects. We held our perimeter for crime scene purposes, and we started marking and collecting evidence.
Did you call a K-9?
We did. K-9 had previously been called for, but had not arrived. I think Sergeant Anderson called for it, and then I called for a K-9 specifically for an article search.
Let's start with Sergeant Anderson. When he called for a K-9, what type of K-9 was he calling for?
Tracking dog,
In order to potentially locate a suspect or subject?
correct.
And when you called for a K-9, what type of K-9 were you calling for?
A K-9 to do an article search.
And if you would explain to the jury what you mean by an article search.
It's a specific training that the K-9s have. Their sense of smell is like 10,000 more than that of a human. So they can pick up without getting too technical, they can pick up the odor of foreign objects real well. So if you're looking for stolen property, or in this case it was a gun, they would work, you give them the general area, like in this case, they were told we believe it's in the gully and the ramp, but then they would start working, in this case, they worked their way north from kind of the base of the ramp and back and forth.
I'm going to stop you right there. So the article for which you called the K-9 to search was the firearm that the defendant told you was thrown in the grass?
Yes,
You did not call for a K-9 earlier specifically to search for a gun, correct?
no, not at that time.
Why not?
So it wasn't necessary at that time. Unless of exigent circumstances where it was flooding or some evidence might be washed away, that's the last thing in the order of priorities in an incident like this would be, we could have waited 5 hours for the K-9. But last on the, pretty much close to the last of the list would be to have the K-9 come and do that article search. The article wasn't going to grow legs and walk away.
Is that also because the scene was secured at that time, sir?
Yes, sir.
At this time, Your Honor, introducing under stipulation states 8 and 9, which is a CD of the radio traffic between Palm Beach Gardens Police Department, and also a transcript.
Any objections? Stipulated to? Admitted. Thank you very much. Admitted. 8 and 9. Damien, you happy? Yes. Okay.
No objection at all, but I do have a comment.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I also have to publish the radio traffic and also provide, or hold on, sir.
No. I was
And I'll
just going to,
provide the transcripts to the jury.
terrific.
Thank you.
Deputy Dunkley, help out passing out these transcripts, please. And then, when that's all done, we will publish. .3. You may not have it. Yep, I'm good. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, while you're getting that all organized, you've heard us say, remember, I told you that during this process, it'll be a little educational, and there's another instruction that covers, you keep hearing us say stipulations. When lawyers, parties agree that certain facts are true, that is called a stipulation of facts. You must accept stipulated facts as having been proven. However, the significance of these facts, as with all facts, is for you to decide. In this case, it is items that have been stipulated to and admitted into evidence through agreement between the parties. Okay? All right, terrific. If you're ready,
Yes, sir, I can go ahead. I'll play the audio first, and then I'll come back and go over the
no
transcript.
problem at all.
So if we can go ahead and start that audio, please, sir.
Calling in signal 33, Doubletree Hotel, being called in by Garden South 1, officer shot at blackmail and duress on the off-ramp behind Doubletree. Male outside walking backwards with a gun.
This begins on page 4, the top of page 4, Your Honor. And I'm sorry, Judge.
Counsel.
And also provide one, too.
Come on with me, Owen.
Call yourself one on whether you know.
26, drive male, hit 3 to 4 times, 51, FD 51 state.
Sorry,
3050.
we're in the parking lot. I'm not in the parking lot, I'm right on the offense. He ran across into the grass field. Guys, right here, right here, right here. He ran in that direction, ran in that direction. I lost visual of him. .348, I'm on that spot, this spot, they went out to the top ramp.
Alright, Steve, come around in the parking lot to the east side.
Okay.
The whole high profile right there. There's a possibility he may have dropped the gun as he was running north.
And I said, you said parking lot, Doubletree.
Yeah.
340,000, 20 of, getting out on detail, in line.
At some point I want to shut down this ramp from 95 to exit BGA. I don't know if we have the resources to do that right now. Take a point, I get up there, Chief. Yeah, I can.
I'm on 95 now, just talking about ramp, where's that?
Yeah, shut down the ramp to southbound 95, to the southbound BGA from 95.
What's it? Heard that if I do, I think it's southbound 95, the BGA locked up. Nico, right where we're at, to the left, if just a couple of steps back by that tree somewhere, he went down there, and I saw him drop something. but that's when I started to walk back towards the van over here, so I'm not sure I lost contact. Jordan's Alpha Tab to dispatch, can you give us a K out of the route?
Yeah.
Jordan's Alpha, it has me on that K on the west side of Doubletree.
26.
Jordan's Alpha 20, can you get some air support? You know, it's like you get some shots fired, officer involved, to our location.
319.
Jordan's Alpha 2348. I got two Jupiter units coming to shut that ramp down, so you just hold it for now and take, you're kind of on a perimeter right there, so watch yourself. Roger that. 3220. Good.
Just foresee myself and Fiverr on the northeast corner of the Doubletree Hotel.
I'm directly east of you right now. Can one of you position yourself further up towards CVS or towards the storage building?
Yeah, 3051.
How's that going?
Out 10.
See if you can get those cars that are coming in at 6 a.m. to come in early.
326.
347, 197, 95, PJ.
Ten four.
Jupiter Alpha 23.
Jupiter 23. Garden out 20.
Tuesday. Okay, so where's the last area of flood again? Where's the last area of flood subject? Somebody else will one advisory last time. Right over here, I'm walking kind of in that direction right now. I either got something in the grass here, it's just debris between the canal bank and Doubletree area. Yeah, Counsel, this is where I walk. I had some deep drop down over here in this area, between the Doubletree and the 95 on there, and drop down, and that's when I lost my this and I went back again, my reading and stuff. All right, I got something here. I don't know if it's a person or if it's an object. All right, that's one. 348 quite a ways north of you. He's up on that north perimeter. Guys, he's right here. He's right here. I got him. He's sitting there up.
Garden out 1, your 1012 was subject.
Give it a shot.
Inspector traffic, DSF, Doubletree.
Paragraph 20 has EMS 56s on the ramp. Some go the wrong way up the ramp. Don't see us.
10-4 southbound, range 10-4.
Yeah, we're on the southbound ramp just east of the Doubletree. Have them respond to there.
And sir,
Counselor?
Is this the radio traffic with your Palm Beach Gardens Police Department dispatch during the time of the officer-involved shooting that we've been talking about?
It is.
And this transcript in front of you, is this a written transcript of those radio transmissions?
It is.
Have you reviewed this prior to coming up here and testifying, sir?
I did.
And on these radio transmissions, do you see yourself identified and the communications that you had with dispatch during that time?
I do.
I'd like to review some of those, sir, with you, some of what we just heard.
Very well.
Starting at page 4 on the top. Sir, starting at the top of that, and obviously these times here that we're talking about, like 15:57, that's not in relation to the time of the morning. That's in relation to the time on, like the actual video audio file. It's not 15:57 when all this is occurring, correct?
Correct.
Actually, you'll see, like if we go down to the middle of that page right here, where it has dispatch, and dispatch then reads out the time, 03:15, 3:15 a.m., is that correct?
That is correct.
So that's the real time on October 18th of 2015.
Yes.
Starting at the very top here where it says 15:57, and it says the emergency tone is sounded, and that's the loud electronic beep that we heard, sir?
Correct.
And what is that meant to identify you of?
That there's an emergency situation.
And then as we're going down, we see here in the middle where it says 1649, and it has Gardens Alpha 1. Is that the call sign that the defendant was using at that time?
It is.
And what did he say at that time on the radio?
From the transcript,
Yes, sir.
he said, "I'm on the radio now."
And then what did the dispatch say? Right below it.
Yeah. Dispatch advises male hit 3 or 4 times.
You don't hear that specifically on this.
No, you do not.
Do you know whether or not Officer Raja was previously on with dispatch utilizing his personal cell phone?
Yes.
And was that through the 911 service?
Yes.
So that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at just radio transmissions through Palm Beach Gardens Police Department and dispatch.
Correct.
And then down here at 1725, is that once again Officer Raja said he ran in that direction. I lost visual of him. Is that right?
Yes.
On the following page, page 5, after Officer Fee says, okay, what do you say?
Steve, come around in the parking lot to the east side.
And then Officer Fee says, okay, and then what do you say?
Go high profile there. There's a possibility he may have dropped the gun and he is running north, as he was running north.
And what do you mean when you say go high profile there?
That we use the bright lights of our patrol cars to not just illuminate the area, but give any fleeing suspect the sense that they're surrounded. And it also makes it possible for the helicopter pilots to spot the area to search from the sky.
And is this right after you would have gotten on scene and spoken with the defendant?
Yes, I was standing with then Officer Raja when Officer Fee went on scene. And I had gotten enough information to know I wanted him on the east side of the hotel closer to where we were to light up that gully with his red and blue lights.
And so when you said that there was a possibility he may have dropped the gun as he was running north, is that based on what the defendant had just told you about throwing the gun in the grass behind the SUV?
Clearly.
So we're 100%. Is that a yes or no?
Yes, 100%.
Thank you, sir. And then further down here, we see page 5, towards the middle. Is that you saying that you want to shut down 95 ramp?
It is.
And is this part of the process that you just explained to the jury, that now you're quarantining or securing that scene to try to set up a perimeter?
Yes.
And then at the bottom here, where it has on 1950 count on the digital counter from Sergeant Anderson, when he's caused to get a K9, is that what you're talking about as far as a tracking K9 to locate a subject or a person?
Yes, at that time.
And then on the following page, top of page 6, we see you once again on dispatch. And are you calling for EMS to stage at Doubletree?
Yeah, I wanted them in the proximity, but somewhere where they would be safe.
Once again, that's what you were talking about before as far as setting up all your assets.
Yes, sir.
And below that, you also called for air support, is that correct?
That is correct.
And what would air support be for that type of incident?
The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office helicopter unit.
And then also down here in the middle, you mentioned that you have 2 Jupiter units coming to shut that ramp down.
Yes, I did that because obviously Jupiter is north Palm Beach Gardens. I requested their assistance to shut that southbound 95 exit ramp down so I could free up my officers to move them south of the ramp and east and west of it.
And so while you say you just got 2 Jupiter units coming, we don't necessarily see that on these transmissions, do we?
No, I switched my radio over to their channel and made the request from their supervisor.
And so at the same time that you're speaking to your dispatch, is it fair to say you're also multitasking and speaking to Jupiter Police Department's dispatch to acquire even more assets?
Yes.
Going to page 7. And looking down here, after the 45 seconds of silence, when Sergeant Mall says, I'm 97 at 95 in PGA, what does 97 mean?
Arrived on scene.
So that would be the point at which Sergeant Mall got to the scene, sir?
Yes.
And going further down, where it talks about you called Alpha 20 to Alpha 1, advised where you last saw him. Alpha 20, is that your call sign, sir?
I was Alpha 20, yes.
And Alpha 1 that evening was the defendant?
Yes.
And then the defendant answered as far as the direction at which he believed Corey Jones went and where he lost sight of him?
Correct.
Page 8. After digital counter 2605, what does Officer Raja say?
You want me to read it, Counselor?
Yes, sir.
Guys, he's right here. He's right here. I got him. I got him. Hey, I got him.
And then at that point, after dispatch asks if you're 1012 with the subject, what's 1012 mean?
In contact with.
And then Officer Raja says, give us traffic. And what does traffic mean, sir?
Emergency traffic sends a signal to all other officers to stay off the radio.
And why would you have all officers stay off the radio at that time, sir?
Because at that point, we were in our tactical stick, about to approach what was later determined to be Mr. Jones, and we wanted to have free use of the radio for emergency purposes.
And then 55 seconds later, you get back on and call EMS up the ramp, is that correct?
I did.
Would that be after you located Corey Jones, sir?
Yes.
Page 9, top of page 9. Is that when you call off the TK armored vehicle, sir?
It is.
And why did you call that off, sir?
Because we believed we had the suspect contained and that he was no longer a threat.
And that's actually the person known as Corey Jones.
It is, Counselor.
And the reason why you use that language is that based on what the defendant told you that night, as far as him being a suspect and a threat.
Correct.
Page 10. On the 6th line down, as you identified, it says you need a K-9 for an article search. Is that when you called for the K-9 to search for the firearm, sir?
That is correct.
And you had already explained why you waited until that time?
I believe so, yes.
Did you see any evidence other than that firearm at the crime scene?
Yes, we saw 6 shell casings that were along the paved portion of the ramp near Mr. Jones' car.
And sir, did you make sure that those were marked?
Yes, we covered them with cones.
Did you touch those casings, sir?
No, nobody did.
Did you kick those casings?
No.
And after that point, what did you do, sir?
Waited for K-9 to come, watched them conduct the article search. When they located the firearm in the tall grass, I ordered it to be marked also with an orange cone, actually 2, but marked with orange cones for its location and integrity.
And at that time, did you also begin, had you been in contact with making sure that your command staff was notified and everybody started to arrive on scene?
Yes, very early on, I contacted Captain Wright long before we ever found what was later to be termed Mr. Jones, and he started notifying all the chain of command.
And is that part of your critical incident response?
It is.
protocol?
It is.
Did you speak to the defendant once again?
I did.
And did you see his tactical vest?
Yes.
Where was it located, sir?
In the passenger seat of the van.
Did you ask him if he was wearing his tactical vest when he approached Corey Jones?
I did.
What was his response?
No.
Did you ask him again if he was wearing that vest?
I repeated the question.
How did you repeat it?
I said, you had your tactical vest on, right?
And what was his response?
No, I didn't have it on, Sarge.
What did you do that time?
I sent him outside the crime scene with Sergeant Anderson, who's a PBA rep.
What is PBA, sir?
It's the Police Benevolence Association. It's the union for law enforcement. And a PBA rep acts as a liaison for an officer, in this case involved in an officer-involved shooting, and the union attorneys.
And so even though Sergeant Anderson was on scene as a law enforcement officer, he was also a union rep at that time and went with the defendant.
Yes,
And what was his role at that time?
just to stand by with Officer Raja until attorneys arrived.
Attorneys from where?
The union, state attorney's office, sheriff's office shooting team.
And did you see the defendant earlier that evening at lineup?
I did.
What was he wearing at that time?
A full uniform.
Were you surprised to see him out of uniform when you arrived at PGA and 95?
I was. I had been gone for 2 weeks prior to this. It was only my second night back at work. I wasn't fully briefed on what his duties were, but seeing him in lineup in full uniform, I couldn't believe that he changed out of uniform at 3 whatever in the morning, 2:30 in the morning for The shift ended at 6, so just to change for that short amount of time, I was surprised.
And you watched the search of the K-9 once it arrived, sir?
I did.
And you mentioned earlier, but at this stage, where did they begin the search of the K-9, sir?
Kind of at the base of the ramp.
And so would that be really even to the west and maybe even a little bit even further south of where the van and the SUV were?
Yes.
And did you point them in that general direction, or did you let them go about their search independently?
They work independently. I gave them a general direction. We believe it's, up this ramp somewhere between the cars and where we found Mr. Jones. But they work independently, and then that way, because of the skilled expertise of the canines, when they do find what you're looking for, it's almost a second validation to what is known. Right. Yeah, it's a second validation to what is suspected. Like the example I like to use is you can suspect there's drugs in a car, but you might not necessarily be able to search it legally. But if a dog alerts to that car and you do find drugs, it's a lawful search. So.
And the location where the firearm was found, is that consistent to the general area in which the defendant directed you when he said the person threw the gun in the tall grass?
It is. It was.
Did you provide a sworn oral statement in this case to detectives?
Basis?
Well,
Just yes or no?
Yes?
do you usually write a report?
Of course.
But in this matter, you did not write a report, did you?
No.
How long was that initial tape statement, sir?
7 minutes.
Was it as thorough and comprehensive as you would normally write your report?
No, it was 15 hours after I started my shift. If I had time to actually sit down and chronologically write out the events that happened, it would have been much more thorough.
Why did you not write a report?
It's the protocol of the Sheriff's Department shooting team. It's a process in an officer-involved shooting. Once you give the tape statement, not to write a report.
After you cleared the scene, did that conclude your involvement in the investigation of the case? As far as what you actively did for any investigation?
Yes.
Your Honor. I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Sergeant Spragg.
Mr. King.
You put out a lot, so I'm going to have to unpack this a little bit for you, all right?
Very well.
First of all, I acknowledge that you've been a sergeant. Were you a policeman for 25 some odd years?
28,
28 years? Sergeant for 14?
approximately.
Okay. And that night, you were the sergeant in charge of that scene.
Correct.
So if I understood you correctly, what you said was initially you were at the Doubletree Hotel.
Correct.
And the Marriott Hotel, I'm sorry.
Thank you for correcting me.
Sorry. And you responded after you received the tone,
Yes.
an emergency tone.
Yes.
And that lets you know something big has happened and you need to pay attention.
Yes.
And so as the sergeant, your responsibility there is to get to the scene and manage the scene, correct?
Correct.
And when you got there, you saw Officer Raja standing at the front of the van
Yes.
by the engine block side.
I couldn't, 3.5 years later, I couldn't swear to exactly where he was standing.
Okay.
But it was towards the front and near the rear of Mr. Jones' car.
Towards the front.
And near the front of Mr. Jones'
Okay,
car.
near the front. Okay, all right, very good. So when the two cars are like this, at that somewhat angled T,
Right,
he's in that, by the front of both of those cars.
right.
All right. And then you testified today that you got out, you left your car,
Yes,
and you went over to Officer Raja to talk to him?
Yes.
Because I think you testified that it was critical to talk to him and get the information out.
I don't know if I used the word critical, but yeah, it is very important.
So it's very important to go talk to him and get the information out. You want a description of the subject, 'cause you think you have an active shooter, right?
Potentially.
All right, so you want to get a description of the subject?
Yes.
You want his height,
Yes.
what he's wearing,
Yes.
the direction of travel,
Yes.
if he's armed,
Of course.
if you can describe the weapon, that would be great.
Of course.
And any other distinctive features that he might have to help the people on the outside in case they come across him to know who he is, right?
Yes.
All right, so you got out of your car and you spoke to Raj. All right,
But I didn't go into that detail.
okay.
I got basic information so we could start doing what we had to do. We had Officer Raja with us, who had all that detail. We got the basic of what we needed to be able to go on to the next steps in setting the perimeter and beginning the search.
Okay, hold that.
So it wasn't a 20-minute interview.
Do you have a copy of the transcript up there?
I have a copy of the radio log.
You have the radio transcript.
Yes.
You have that? Just take a look at it. And when you find the part in there where you tell the people on the perimeter how tall he is, what he looks like,
Officer Raja had already done that.
I get that. I'm asking you, when you find the part where you said it, let me know.
When I reviewed it, I don't believe I saw that.
Okay, so it's not in there, is it?
I'd have to review it again.
Take your time.
If you want to tell me it's not in there, it's fine. But Officer Raja had already radioed that information. Why would I duplicate what one person already did?
Show me in there where Officer Raja tells the people how tall he is, what type of weapon it is, anything.
Like I said, he gave the basic information, which is what we needed at that time. And we had him with us as we searched.
So it's not in there.
Not in there.
So you get out and you go to where he is, correct?
Correct.
Because you don't want to have to run back to your car and give the information out, right? You want to do it from your shoulder, from your radio. Your
Of
personal.
course.
All right. Now, your portable radio is different from your car radio, isn't it?
No, they work off the same frequency.
But you don't take the radio out of the car and carry it with you when you walk around, right?
No.
It's a separate radio, correct?
Yes.
And that radio is either on your hip or it can be on your vest up here, correct?
Correct.
And it has like a little shoulder mic thing that you can talk into, right?
Yes.
Would it surprise you if I told you that the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department keeps logs of the radio transmissions?
No.
Would it surprise you to know that the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department identifies the car radio versus the portable radio?
No.
Would it surprise you to know that the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department has assigned digital readout numbers to the car radio versus the portable radio?
No.
And would it surprise you to know that every transmission that you made before you got to the top of the hill was from your car radio?
Excuse me?
Would it surprise you to know that every transmission that you made before you got to the top of the hill was from your car radio?
Never got to the top of any hill.
Until you got to the top of the middle of the off-ramp with Officer Arlada.
I'm sorry, where?
To the top of
We never got to the top.
wherever you position, 100 yards north of Raj.
Well, last time it was 80, you said, so.
Okay. Would it surprise you to know that every communication that you made on your car radio when you were further up the ramp than Raj were from your car radio?
It's possible.
So you probably didn't get out of your car, did you?
I got out of my car, Counselor.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about your trek up the ramp. When you went up the ramp, you had your gun out. I'm sorry, you were in your car, weren't you?
I was.
And you drove up the ramp
I did.
with Officer Arlada with you.
Yes.
And he had his long gun out,
He did.
and he covered you down as you went up the ramp, correct?
Yes.
And when you got to the top of the ramp, you started to establish that perimeter.
We never got to the top of the ramp, and I had already started establishing that perimeter.
When you got about 80 yards up the ramp,
Okay,
you're establishing that perimeter,
okay,
and you send Arlotta back for the TK4.
yes.
All right.
I'd already established the perimeter prior to that.
Okay. I'll grant you that. All right? Once you got there, and you all are setting up and you're waiting, your radio, Boshin calls you on the radio. Actually, if you can just go to page 7 of the transcript.
I'm there.
Okay, and right about where, just below, sorry, I lost my glasses. At digital count 2503, Boshin calls you and says, Sarge, what was our last area of sight again? Do you see that?
I do.
And then below that, then he calls you again, right?
Yes,
And then, despite the fact that you got out of your car, talked to Raj, got the minimum information that you needed, you asked him, hey, Raj, what was the last place you seen him? Do you see that?
I did.
Okay.
First-hand information should go straight to the officer from Officer Raja, not through me.
Okay, just hang on till I give you a question.
Very well.
So, once you got to the top of the to the 80 yards beyond the cars,
Okay.
Sergeant Anderson arrived,
Yes,
and you all formed what you were calling the stick,
yes,
and that's Sergeant Anderson had the shield.
correct,
That's a ballistic shield, correct?
correct,
And it's somewhat bullet resistant.
correct,
And as you all proceeded toward, now that you had identified where you thought Mr. Jones was, you are proceeding in that direction, correct?
correct.
You were with a long gun at this point, correct? You have a rifle.
I was.
Any reason to believe anybody wasn't armed?
We're obviously all armed.
Okay, everybody has a gun. We're all out. And that's because you don't know if the suspect still has a gun. Is that correct?
It's because in any active shooter situation, you can't just assume that there isn't more than one gun.
So after you approach him, after that's over, you call the K-9, correct?
Yeah, well, I called for EMS,
Yes, EMS, and
and then there were other things I did before I called for K-9, yes.
but you didn't tell the K-9 exactly where to search. And I think you said earlier, for the integrity of it.
Correct.
When this is all over, you give your statement,
Correct.
right? And I recognize that you said that, you know, it was 15 hours into your shift that you testified to,
Correct.
and you would rather have written it.
Correct.
However, they made you give an audio statement, correct?
Correct.
And you gave one to Detective Pfeiffer.
I did.
Your testimony here today is that you told, so I struck that question. When you talked to Detective Pfeiffer, did you tell her that you got out of the car?
I told her I arrived on scene, which to me meant that I was on scene talking with Officer Raja, but I was not that specific.
So in your statement to Detective Pfeiffer, you don't tell her that you got out of the car.
I don't specify that, no.
And you also don't tell Detective Pfeiffer that Raj said that he shot him, do you?
Your Honor, I'm the defendant, and Mr. Raja, I'm just objecting to the way that he's referring to his client.
Okay?
I apologize.
Just, no need to apologize. Rephrase for me.
And you also didn't tell Detective Pfeiffer that Mr. Raja had shot.
No.
That's important, isn't it?
I put enough on tape to refresh my memory. I have independent recollection of what took place that night. And you have asked me, Counselor, several questions that I would have had to have independent recollection to answer yes or no. So I think that's reasonable.
So my question to you is, you didn't tell the detective that Raj had shot him, did you?
I did not specify that, no.
And you didn't tell the detective you got out of the car, did you?
I did not specify that.
Now, you did tell Detective Feifel that Mr. Raja told you that he threw the gun in the tall grass and you believe to the rear of his vehicle, correct?
Yes,
And ultimately, you said that was about 20 feet,
I said that in the stand your ground hearing.
okay?
It was just a guesstimate.
But it was actually a little further than 20 feet, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think when the FBI measured it, I was a little short, but it was a general area.
It was about 70 feet, wasn't it?
Very well.
So you were wrong about that, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, Raja just pointed to the area. It could have been 70, could have been 100.
Exactly. So it was a stressful situation.
Of course.
Officer had just discharged his weapon, someone was killed.
Well, we didn't know that at the time.
Just pause for a second. I'm not going to make you stand by the microphone
I'll speak louder.
or just yell.
You got it. It was a stressful situation.
Of course.
Officer had discharged his weapon.
Yes.
Someone lost their life.
We didn't know that at that time.
Ultimately, you did know that.
Yes,
It's high stress for you as the sergeant, isn't it?
of course.
And in the course of you being a sergeant and doing what you do, you got some things wrong, didn't you?
I don't know. I don't think I got anything wrong. I think I just didn't specify enough for you.
All right, just pause for a second.
Yes, sir.
And any redirect? Any redirect examination? Go ahead, sir.
Did you get wrong that that defendant told you he saw Corey Jones throw a silver handgun in the grass behind his SUV?
I did not get that wrong.
Did you get wrong in securing the crime scene that night?
I did not get that wrong.
Did you get wrong calling EMS to stage for the protection of yourself and anybody you might find that night?
I did not get that wrong.
Did you get wrong calling in all the assets you might need in order to assist in a critical incident?
I did not get that wrong.
Did you get wrong calling in a canine in order to search for that firearm that the defendant told you he saw Corey Jones throw in the grass behind his SUV?
No, I did not get that wrong.
Did you get wrong taking care of the safety of officers when you approached a person that the defendant told you had been armed?
I did not get that wrong.
Were you aware of the identification that the defendant had told dispatch through the use of 911 before your arrival?
I was.
The use of 911 instead of his actual department-issued radio?
Yes.
Did the detective who questioned you during the 7-minute statement you gave after working 15 and a half hours ask you every single question that you would have written and answered in a report?
Not even close.
I've got nothing further, Your Honor. This witness is excused from the state.
You may step down, sir. Watch your step and thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
State, call your next witness. Medic Haywood, please. Mr. Haywood, come on up, sir. And good afternoon, and thank you for your patience. If you would do me a favor, once you get out here to the center, raise your right hand and face Mr. Clerk for me.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes, sir.
All right, you're going to meet Deputy Dunkley over there. Then once you step up into the witness stand, if you would please watch your step. And then you look pretty tall as well. I guess the short guy, everybody's tall. So if you would do me a favor, grab that microphone and pull it closer. Yeah, right. And if you would state your full name for the record and slowly spell it for us, please.
Matthew Lee Haywood, Matthew Lee, Lee. Haywood, Haywood.
State, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Are you currently employed as a medic right now?
No, ma'am, I am not. I'm retired.
When did you retire?
October 15th, 17,
How long were you a paramedic?
30 years.
30 years? I want to direct your attention to October 18th of 2015, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Where were you employed at that time?
City of Palm Beach Gardens Fire Rescue.
And what was your position with that agency?
I retired as a battalion chief, but that night I was an EMS captain.
Do you recall whether or not you were working in the early morning hours of October 18th, 2015?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
And during those early morning hours, did you get a call or dispatch to go to the area of PGA and 95?
Yes, ma'am.
And you recall what time you got that?
It was shortly after 3 o'clock, I believe, in the morning.
When you received the call, who went along with you?
An engine company, a rescue, a battalion chief, and myself.
You recall what time you got there?
I could refer to a report to give you the exact times, but roughly a few minutes afterwards.
If I show you,
I think she's going to show you something.
I'll
Come
see.
on up, show it to him. You take a look at it, read it to yourself, and once you've read it to yourself, I want you to look up, and then she's going to ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
And what's the question?
Yes, ma'am.
so what time did you get the call?
3:16
3:16 a.m.
a.m., yes, ma'am.
Okay, and that would have been the first time that you would have been dispatched to that location.
Yes, ma'am.
And what time did you depart from
Units went en
Where you
route at, looks like 3:19,
okay,
3:17. It's kind of fuzzy right there.
all right. And what time did you arrive at the scene?
Our arrival time at the scene was at 3:30.
Now, so that's about, what, 14 minutes after you got the dispatch call?
Yes, ma'am.
Why did it take you so long to get there? What happened?
For that nature of call, it came in as a shooting. Law enforcement requires us to stage until they deem the scene secure. So we were initially dispatched and then put into staging.
Okay. And when you, so is that just kind of like a waiting period for you
Yes, ma'am.
to go in? Okay. At some point, were you given the okay by law enforcement to go in?
Yes, ma'am, we were.
Okay. And is there a time within that report that you were at the location where the body was located?
Yes, ma'am, that was at 3:32.
So you arrived on scene and actually, you actually got to Corey Jones at 3:32 a.m.?
Yes, ma'am.
And that would have been how long after you received that phone call? I'm sorry, not the phone call, but the dispatch?
15, 16 minutes.
All right. When you get to Corey Jones, what do you observe?
We were directed up the off-ramp and then to an area kind of about halfway up the off-ramp, and law enforcement directed me to where he was lying in kind of the ravine area over the guardrail.
Were you able to make your way down to where his body was?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay. And did you go down there alone, or did you go down there with someone else?
Driving a small Suburban, or Tahoe rather, I was by myself, so I was a little more nimble than the bigger trucks getting up the on-ramp, so I kind of got there a little ahead of them. So I got there first.
Okay. Now, did you actually, when you got there, did you actually walk to where Corey Jones's body was?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And so when you got there, were there other law enforcement officers surrounding his body already, standing around?
I know there was an officer up by the rail, and I think there was one down in the ravine area.
Okay. And so when you get there, when you actually get to his body, what did you observe?
He was on his back. Unfortunately, he was not breathing. He had no pulse. His pupils were fixed and dilated. At that point, he had passed.
So there was no need for you to render any sort of medical?
No, ma'am.
And did you pronounce him at the scene?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
Okay. And what time would that have been when you pronounced him?
Probably about 3:33.
Okay.
Because, I mean, sign of arrival to get there and then, a minute to do a primary and secondary survey on them, about a minute.
Did you look at, did you touch him at all?
Yes, ma'am.
So when you touched him, did you immediately know upon touching him that he was dead?
I had an intuition of it, 30 years on the job, but you still have to go through the process.
And what was the process you went through?
Checking for a pulse in 2 locations, pupillary response, listening to his lungs, seeing if there was any movement of air, listening to heart tones.
And nothing?
Nothing.
1 second, Judge.
Sure.
Judge, I'm done.
Thank you. And cross-examination? Okay. Thank you so much. You may step down, watch your step, and you're excused, sir, and I appreciate your patience. You're welcome. State, call your next witness. Did you say Knox? Nauss. Brian Nauss. Don't. Take that microphone stand and even push it even closer to their podium. Will you do that? Remember, they can hear you. Right around. More a little sooner. Jurors are okay? Keep working? Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Brian, come on up, sir. Thank you for your patience. Once you meet Deputy Dunkley out here, you're going to turn to Mr. Clerk and raise your right hand for me.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do.
All right, meet Deputy Dunkley right there now. And you're going to step up into that witness box. Please be careful. The seat swivels and rolls, so get it where you're very comfortable. Most important to me, though, is that that microphone's pretty close to your mouth, and the whole base moves, so you can pull it towards you. And I think you look great there. If you would tell us your full name and spell it for us.
Brian, Brian P. Nauss, Nauss.
State, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Nauss.
Good afternoon.
Can you tell us what it is that you do for a living?
I am an emergency communications supervisor for the city of Palm Beach Gardens.
And what does an emergency communications supervisor do?
I supervise a shift of dispatchers and call takers for the communications center.
And what do dispatchers and call takers do?
The call takers answer emergency and non-emergency incoming calls, and the dispatchers, the radio dispatchers, dispatch those calls out to the police units.
So when we call 911, we're talking or speaking with a call taker?
Generally, yes.
And then is there someone else behind the scenes that is relaying the information from the call taker to police officers or someone else?
The call taker inputs the information into the computer, generates a call for service that's forwarded to the radio dispatcher, and the radio dispatcher will send a unit or units.
If you have an emergency, you're not going to speak directly to an officer on duty. It goes through the call taker, through the computer, through the dispatcher, and then to the officer or whomever would be responding to the incident.
That's correct.
Now, how long have you been a supervisor with the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department?
A little over 2 years.
And before that, were you not in a supervisory capacity, but still with Palm Beach Gardens Police
Yes.
Department? And what was your role then?
I was an emergency communications operator.
And how long in total have you been with Palm Beach Gardens Police Department?
Just shy of 8 years.
Prior to working with the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department, did you work at any other agency?
Yes, I worked in 2 agencies in New Jersey.
And how long total have you been in this field of work?
Approximately 30 years.
So approximately 30 years you have worked as a dispatcher or as a supervisor of other dispatchers and call takers.
Yes.
Want to bring you to October 18 of 2015. Were you employed with Palm Beach Gardens Police Department at that time?
I was.
And were you working on that morning?
I was.
And you were working in your role as a supervisor of dispatch?
No, at that time, I was a communications operator.
Okay, this was before your promotion.
Yes.
Did you get a call that morning from an officer on the 911 line?
Yes, I did.
And who was that officer?
Officer Raja.
How did you know that it was Officer Raja on the call?
In the call, he identified himself as Gardens Alpha 1, which is his radio designator.
And at the time, you would have known that that is, that call sign would have identified him as the person calling in?
Yes.
Did that surprise you, that he was calling in on 911?
Yes.
Did you know that he was actually on duty at
Yes,
that
I
time?
did.
So you were surprised to get a 911 call from an officer of your department who's on duty at the time?
Yes, I was.
When he called in, well, let me ask you this. When the call comes in, do you see a number or is there any identifying information that comes to your computer?
There's a cell phone number that comes up on the screen?
Okay, did that number register to you in any way?
Not at all.
Okay, so you pick up the phone just like you would do in any other call, is that right?
Correct.
And what is the first thing that you hear?
Before I even speak, I hear, "Drop the fucking gun right now."
Okay, and then as that person not speaking to you, clearly.
Correct.
Okay. So after that, do you realize who's on the other line?
I recognize his voice
And you recognize his voice how?
through hearing it over the radio.
But as far as personally or knowing him on a personal level, would you say that you did, or was it just work?
I've only met him once, very briefly, in a communication center.
So you hear someone say, "Drop the effing gun," and then what's your reaction at that time?
I said, 911. What's your emergency?
And does the person say something in response to that?
Said that it was Gardens Alpha 1. He had just shot someone. He had.
Come on up. Wait for everybody to come. One second.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm showing you what's marked as states 10. Can you just take a look at that bag and let me know if your 911 call is in there? And you could read on the front of the bag if you'd like.
Says 911 call from Palm Beach Gardens PD.
Okay. And Judge, at this time, the state would move into evidence, states 10, which has previously been stipulated to.
Any objection? And it's stipulated to, what's the number again, 10? 10. Admitted.
And Your Honor, we also like to move into evidence by stipulation states exhibit number 11, which is a transcript of
A
that.
transcript, so that's number 11 if you're keeping track, and it's through stipulation again, correct? Thank you guys for working together on these items.
Your Honor, may I publish and also provide copies to the jury?
Absolutely. Deputy Dunkley's going to help you out while you get ready to do the call, but don't play the call until they all have it. And do you have a copy for me as well? Thank you. And while they're passing out, I'm going to tell the lawyers and the jurors. When the lawyers say, may they approach the witness, they're showing respect to the court, to me, and not me personally, but to the process. So I'm going to tell all the lawyers right now, starting now, you don't have to ask anymore. No, but I want to say for the jury, that's what good lawyers do. If you notice during the entire process, all the lawyers have asked, may we approach? Now, if I start to sense anybody's misbehaving or being too aggressive, I won't be shy to tell them back it up. But right now, you guys have all been great. You don't have to ask me anymore. You can just strut on up there and show them what you need to show them. And with that being said, everybody has their transcript. And are we ready to play it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's do it. Thank you.
Let's fucking go right now! This is going down from what I got one guy that just shot one person. I'm at that offset right behind Doubletree, right there. You're behind the Doubletree? I'm on the offset, 95 south on the offset, off the Doubletree. I am not coming to anything right now. And, I got one down, I got one man down. Where you go, right? Yeah, man, drop out. On the off-ramp, right? On the off-ramp, then you can use a couple of contact with my margaritas. All right, you got it, buddy. Where's your radio? Where's your radio, Ryan? My radio's in the van right now, I'll handle it with me. All right, that's on the phone. All right, stay on the phone, buddy. What's the guy look like? Black, they're wearing all black dress, had a silver handgun in his right hand. I came out, I saw him come out with a handgun, I gave him a command, I identified myself, and he turned, pointed the gun at me, started running, I shot him. I lost contact 55 to 28 on the SUV. Go ahead. There's going to be a 4 to 28 or 286 Papa Romeo Hotel, 286 PR8. Don't know yet. Spike, put that out now. It's a 08 Hyundai, 286 Papa Romeo Hotel. Yes, 286. It's coming back on a 4-door Hyundai gray. Yeah, SUV. Yeah, it's at 08 worth. It's not stolen or anything. All right, man. All right, stay on the phone. Where's the van at? Where's your van at? In the Doubletree lot? No, right on the offense. You'll see my van right there. I'm walking back to my van. I'm back to my van in the car. All right. At least 3 to 4 times. All right, you got your radio now? No. Hold on, not yet. All right, I got units coming. All right, man. Thank you. All right, stay on the phone here, all right, buddy? Okay. All right. God, I'm ready, you know. All right, hang up the phone, buddy. All right, bye.
Okay, Mr. Nauss. Now, is this the entire 911 call conversation between you and the defendant, Mr. Raja?
Yes.
And there came a point in the call where the defendant gave you a description of what the person who he said had a gun was wearing, what they looked like, what the handgun looked like. Do you remember hearing that?
Yes.
And what did you do with that information?
I put that information into the call notes to be broadcasted out to the other units.
Okay. And so that information goes, when you say other units, does that mean the police officers?
Responding police units.
Okay. So they would have gotten that information based on what he told you during the call?
Correct.
Now, you also asked him at some point, where was his radio? Do you recall hearing that?
Yes.
And why did you ask him that?
Because it was unusual for him to call on 911 when I know that he had a radio with him.
And you said you've been doing dispatch for 30 years?
Give or take, yes.
And in your 30 years of dispatch, had you ever had an experience where an officer involved in a shooting called you from his personal phone on 911?
No.
Now, he said to you that he's hit at least 3 to 4 times. Is that also true?
Yes.
Do you recall if you would have put that information out in your dispatch?
That was put into the call notes.
One moment, Your Honor.
Sure.
Now, also in that call, you read out the tag number. Is that right?
Yes.
And someone else that you were referring to as Spike put that tag number through, ran it through a system?
I did.
Okay. And then you also instructed someone to get medics out. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And is that pretty much what you do in your function as a call taker?
Yes.
One moment, Judge.
Cross-examination?
Yes, 1 second.
Sure.
Good afternoon, Mr. Nauss. How are you?
Good afternoon.
So you've been, you were a dispatcher with Palm Beach Gardens.
Correct.
And I just have, just very briefly, you had said that when you're given information over the phone, you put it in the call notes, correct?
Correct.
And those notes go to the dispatchers?
Yes.
All right. They don't go to the cars of the officers, do they?
Yes. All that goes through their computer-aided dispatch.
But not through but not always through vocal,
Verbal communications,
sometimes just through the notes in
the notes into the call notes into the computer.
So in other words, sometimes if you don't read the computer notes, then you don't get that information.
Correct.
I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as, I guess, States 9, the transcript of the radio. Just take a look at that, just the very the top portion up there. Just let me know when you're done.
Just the first paragraph?
Yes. Where the 10th, where the 33, the signal 33 goes out.
Okay.
All right. So what they put out there was, if I'm wrong, correct me, that officer shot a black male in dreads off the ramp behind Doubletree, male's outside walking backwards with a gun, correct?
Correct.
It doesn't talk about male wearing all black, does it?
No.
It doesn't say it's a silver handgun, does it?
No.
So it just gives some of the information. The rest of it would have been in the call notes
Correct.
that someone would have had to read if they were in their car, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Any redirect? Sir, thank you for your patience. You may step down. Watch your step coming out of there.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, you're excused. Do you have another relatively brief witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Let's do it.
Sure. State will call Officer Rich Pearce.
Officer Rich Pearce, please. Officer Pearce, come on up, sir. Meet Deputy Dunkley out here. And once you get there, if you'd raise your right hand and face Mr. Clerk for us.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Officer, you're going to have a seat right up there. Please watch your step. Once you get situated in the witness stand, that chair swivels and rolls. Get it where you're happy, but then get that microphone. Yeah, either you move forward or you pull it back. It does, the whole base moves, and then talk directly into it. Tell us your full name and spell the last name for us.
Sergeant Richard Pearce, P-E-A-R-C-E.
State, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, how are you employed?
Through the City of Palm Beach Gardens Police Department.
How long have you been a police officer, sir?
Approximately 15 years.
And has all that been with the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department?
Yes, sir.
And what is your present assignment?
I'm the Sergeant of Road Patrol.
And prior to being the sergeant of road patrol, what was your assignment, sir?
I was a canine officer.
What was the name of your K-9, sir?
Dexter.
And what time period were you a K-9 officer, sir?
I started in, I believe, 2014 and ended about 8 months ago.
And did you end upon your promotion as sergeant, sir?
Yes, sir.
And in order to be a K-9 law enforcement officer, do you go through specific training and continuing training?
Correct.
Do you keep logs of your training and the use of your K-9, Dexter?
Yes, sir.
And what are different types of uses for a K-9, sir?
You can use them for a variety of things. You can use them for article searches. You can use them for either detection for explosives, narcotics. You can use them for searching for people, depending on what the dog's trained in.
And when you say articles, what do you mean by articles?
An article can be identified as anything with a form of human odor on it. It could be anything as far as a bullet casing to car keys to articles of clothing.
Something that a person would have touched and left their odor on?
Yes, sir.
And what type of K-9 was Dexter?
He was he's dual certified for explosive detection and what we call patrol rated, which is the searching for either persons or articles.
And did you respond to the I-95 and Pompey and PGA intersection on October 18th of 2015 in reference to an officer-involved shooting?
Yes, sir.
And is this a fair representation of the off-ramp coming from heading south off of I-95 in which you could go and you could turn and go either west or east on PGA?
Yes, sir.
And if we could zoom out a little bit. Right there. And so that would be PGA right there, and then the off-ramp coming off of 95?
Correct.
Or do you want me to zoom out a little more just to, you're good? And what was your understanding of a need for a K-9 at that time?
When I arrived on scene, I was told that Dexter would be needed for a possible article search.
And did you get debriefed by anybody
Afterwards,
when you arrived on scene?
I was told by Sergeant Spragg that Dexter would be needed for an article search.
And did you then conduct a search for the article, sir?
Correct.
And were you the lead K-9 on that search?
Yes.
Did you have anybody else that was assisting you on that search?
I utilized 2 officers at that time. Officer Mike Stalika is a fellow canine officer now retired with Palm Beach Gardens Police Department. He was there, and then Officer Scott Kimbark from the Jupiter Police Department was there.
And if you could just kind of run us through how you would actually conduct an article search like this and how you'd utilize those assets of K-9 Officer Kimbark and then also Officer Stalika.
Their roles were both different, not always necessarily needed, but in this case, they were there to help spot in case Dexter were to locate anything. I believe Officer Kimbark was behind me, and Officer Mike Stalika was off to my right on the, if you're looking at the map, on the roadway, the exit ramp, rather than the grass.
And so that would be along this exit ramp right here, sir?
Yes, sir.
And you and Officer Kimbark were over in the grass?
Yes, sir.
And so how do you search for an article
Well,
with a K-9?
the canine is trained, like I said, to locate the articles. Once the dog is given the command, and I don't know how specific you want me to get, but
Talk about doing gridding and how just a K-9 works to obtain a scent and then stay on a scent, and the general area you might begin in order to go ahead and acclimate the K-9.
on this particular incident here, we started as far south as we could get from, I think we were at close to Mr. Jones's vehicle, and we worked our way.
Would this be that general area that you're talking about?
Correct. We worked our way north in the grass in east and west fashion, Dexter's been doing it for a long time, so he's got a really good search pattern, so he moves on his own left and right depending on where the wind is blowing.
And so, and I'll get back to the wind. So when a canine is operating and searching for an odor, you say he's moving left and right, is that correct? Mm-hmm. And is that so that they're working in a fashion to find the strongest point of a scent? And
Yeah,
then then it starts trailing off, so they work back to the strongest point and keep going back and forth so that they stay on the scent?
Well, the odor is strongest at its point. So wherever the article is, that's where it's going to be the strongest. The wind is going to carry the odor to an undetermined amount of through a cone. As if you were to throw powder into the air, you would see it move with the wind. So the dog, obviously the odor is invisible, we can't see it, but with the dog's nose, it will be able to locate. So if the wind was blowing, depending if it was on his face, and I don't recall which way it was going, I'm sorry, if it was blowing in his face, he would utilize that scent cone from which the wind is taking the article, and he would stay inside that scent cone. So once he gets to the farthest edge of that scent cone, he would then move instinctively back to the middle where it would be the strongest until he locates the article.
And you use the term scent cone, and that's like a cone that comes to a point, that point being where you would expect to find the article.
Correct.
And so by working back and forth, continuously searching for that strongest scent, he's actually working towards that article.
Sure.
And that's what you did in this situation, sir?
Yes, sir.
And you said you had Officer Kimbark with you, so his role as a backup, what would that be?
We utilized him, I think he's on the stand next, but he utilized, once we located the article, he marked the article with a cone.
And what would you do as he's marking the article?
I was once Dexter downed on the firearm, I held him there and made sure that nothing was touched. So once Officer Kimbark placed the cone next to the firearm, I was able to remove Dexter away from the firearm and continue my search.
And so, and I know you basically said it, but your canine's trained to give you an indication whenever he's found an article?
Correct.
And what is that indication?
He lays down.
Is that called a passive indication?
Correct.
As opposed to like barking at you or something?
Correct.
And in this case, Dexter did lay down in an area, sir?
Yes, sir.
And in that area, did you actually locate a firearm, or did Officer Kimbark locate the firearm?
I did.
And you said Officer Kimbark, did he come and actually mark the firearm?
With a cone next to it.
And then what did you do? You said you held down your canine, Dexter.
I ensured Dexter didn't move the
So
evidence.
Dexter wouldn't touch the gun, wouldn't get any type of his DNA on the gun.
Shouldn't have.
And after that was done, after it was marked, did you continue your search, sir?
Yes, sir.
And was that for the rest of the area heading north?
Yes, sir.
And just so we're clear on that area, we're talking about the area in between the actual roadway and the fence line that would be blocking off the Doubletree parking lot?
Yes, sir.
Did you also go over to that Doubletree parking lot to search for potential evidence after you got done with this search?
Yes, sir.
Did you do that by yourself, or did you also utilize your canine Dexter?
I did it by myself with Officer Stalika.
And what were you looking for?
Deficiencies in the vehicles, ricochets, anything out of the norm.
So bullet strikes or defects that would show a bullet actually hitting an object?
Yes.
And did you find anything at all?
I think there was something in question. I left, once I left, they never really let us know if what we found was actual bullet or whatnot.
So you didn't find anything?
No.
In particular. Did you talk to the defendant at all while you were on scene?
No.
And when you arrived, did you see the defendant, Manraja, speaking with anybody?
Yes.
Who was that?
Sergeant Spragg.
And just so we're clear, do you see the defendant, Manraja, in court today?
Yes.
And if you could describe something he's wearing?
Turquoise tie.
As the record reflect, the witness has identified the defendant, Manraja, Your Honor.
Noted.
And that's the same individual you saw speaking with Sergeant Spragg on scene October 18, 2015.
Yes.
Did this conclude your involvement in this investigation, sir?
Yes.
I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes. Just very quick.
Go ahead, sir.
When you saw Sergeant Spragg talking to Officer Raja, they were down by the patrol cars or command post area?
Yes.
And that was after they had found the body and all that, correct?
Yes.
All right. So quickly about the search with your dog.
Yes.
So your dog finds a firearm, passively alerts on it.
Correct.
And then you continue searching, correct?
Yes.
And that's because you don't know if there's more than one firearm, correct?
Correct.
And so you keep searching and look for other firearms?
Yes.
Because sometimes people have more than one, right?
It's possible.
Thank you. No other questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down, sir. Thank you for your patience. Watch your step. Jurors, we're going to call it a night for now. It's 1:45. Maybe I can get you out to beat the traffic. Remember, a couple of things. Don't talk about the case. Don't Google, Facebook, Twitter. Now we're fully invested in this process. We've been working really hard. And so don't ruin it for all of us. And tomorrow morning, because I listened to you guys, you asked me, could we start earlier? And I think I got a general consensus. Everybody wants to do that, but I don't want to be, we got some legal issues to take up. I'm going to take up one tonight, and I'm going to take up one tomorrow morning. But if I ask you to gather at the rendezvous point that we discussed earlier, can you be there around 8:15, 8:20? Everybody can do that. You know where you're... Stop. The same place you went this morning. And then we'll have you brought over. Okay? 8:15, 8:20. Remember, if one of y'all is late, all of you are late. So try to make it there on time, but I'm giving you a window. And our goal then will be to literally start the trial at 8:45. So I'm creating a cushion that when things happen, so we're hoping to start at 8:45. If I get you over there around 8:15, 8:20, we'll have some coffee waiting for you. You're gonna leave your pads upside down. All your documents, everything right there, tuck them into your pad and then turn it upside down so we don't have anything fall out there. Do any of y'all have any questions or anything you need to talk to me about? Because if there was a question about what the process is, I'll go in the jury room with you. Everybody's good? Okay, pause. So, during the actual trial process, the court does not allow questions. When you go back to deliberate, I do entertain all questions. They will be put in writing, and I will go over that with you and the process and how we do it. Now, with that being said, sometimes I can't answer questions by law. But when I get a question, it will be in writing. I'll gather everybody up. We'll talk about what the question is and determine at that juncture, can I answer it? But the lawyers in this case, like I've mentioned earlier, are super lawyers on both sides. And so it's their job to cover what they believe is important for the trial. And that's the process we follow. Did I answer your question? Well, I didn't ask you your direct question. Do you understand my instruction? Okay, that's a yes. Pads down. 8:15 to 8:20 at the rendezvous point. I'll see you guys shortly thereafter. Have a wonderful evening. Watch your step coming out of the jury box. On this thing. So I'm not going to cover that tonight, but I'm going to cover the other issue. So lawyers, I'd ask you to take a 2 or 3 minute break, and then we're going to come back and we have to talk about a legal issue, and I need to be on the record and everything. So 2 or 3 minute break, not the issue regarding the medical examiner, because you just handed us a written document, and I bet you they haven't had a chance to even look at it yet. Am I correct?
I don't want to. I just wanted
Is this the case law that accompanies that motion?
That's fine.
I'm all boned up already, but I want to give everybody, I haven't read the memo, so I want to give...
Whatever you want tomorrow is fine.
Absolutely. We'll do that tomorrow morning about the ME, but I just want to talk to you on the record, and I just need 2 minutes. run. We'll come back here, we'll talk about the legal issue.